welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I want to take you inside the Shark Reef at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. So let me take you on a tour of this interesting exhibit here in Las Vegas. Okay, so we begin the tour. I'll leave the sound up a little bit. Essentially what I do here is just go through straight through the Shark Reef Aquarium and show you the major sites. You know, very traditional, right, in terms of, I think, its design. You'll see some of the plaques that have the informational content. I was one of the first visitors to enter at 10 a.m., so I had a chance to just really see everything. I went through rather quickly, and, you know, I think some attractions are just that way. It just depends on what you're looking for in the attraction. Now, there's the Komodo dragon. That's kind of a highlight. I've never seen one live, so that certainly is something that... you know, for years the Mandalay would advertise, and I think over the years they've toned that down a little bit, but that was always a big deal. The Komodo, and then also the domed aquarium area where you can walk under and see the fish above you, which more and more aquaria have nowadays. And I think that's one of the challenges with running an aquarium. I've certainly been to, you know, theme conferences where designers get into the dynamics of the challenges of working in an aquarium space, and we'll talk about some of that later as I do a comparative review of Mandalay Bay's version with some others out there. I will say, if you look at the design here, it's pretty tasteful. They've taken, I think, the most explicit look at some of the ruins there. They've taken the most explicit versions of theming and really applied them here in this attraction, say, as opposed throughout the casino. This is one of the touch screens. It has a map, and it also has educational information. One of the things that aquaria do nowadays, like say the Monterey Bay, is to really educate people about values and conservation. Anytime you open something that's a hybrid zoo or aquarium that brings in theming or other components, think Disney's Animal Kingdom, you generally have to bring in more of that conservation message. I think it's part of the narrative that you have to develop. So when you look at the theming here, and you know, the sound isn't that loud, but you can hear some of the ambient sound as well. You know, it's I think well done in terms of the overall theme of the Mandalay. If you've watched my videos on the Mandalay theme, it's certainly a theme that's ambiguous, right? It's an Asian type theme that maybe has highlights of places like Burma or Myanmar or Singapore, but never really explicitly states its theme, say compared to the Paris, or of course New York, or perhaps Venetian Bellagio. So it has a much less explicit theme and a more symbolic, or I don't want to say caricatured theme, but it's less, it's more abstract and less realist in terms of its place-based assignments or reference or whatever you want to call the things that the theming refers to. So in just a bit here, I will look at, I want to focus on a comparison here and ask you what elements matter in aquarium construction. And I would suggest to you 3 of these as we look at some stock video. And I have percentages, but I want to challenge this a little bit. So, you know, the narrative that's developed is the story behind, say, the sea life. The design, in this case, of course, at the Mandalay, is all the thematic design that houses the tanks, including the tanks themselves. We'll talk about this later. And then, of course, the third component is the sea life. So my question is, in this case, should it be equally a third each in terms of creating this for the guest experience? Should it be more heavily focused on the sea life because they're performing, if you will, they have that appeal, that's what draws us to the space, and then maybe the narrative can explain a little bit more, and then the design should be less, because you should say that perhaps the focus should be on the sea life and focusing on the marvel of the sea life? Or should you highlight more the narrative, second the design, and third the sea life? And I'll talk about this later, but there's a danger, I think, of focusing too much on the sea life, ironically enough. So if you will, the percentages don't matter, but think of these 3 components: narrative, sea life, and design, and ask yourself, in a space, in any space that has animals as a focus, what should the component be? What should the hypothetical percentages be? Here's sort of that wow moment. It's a very small version compared to, I think, some aquaria today in terms of walking under the rays and the fish and the sharks and so forth. And in a sense, I would almost say to you that there have been certain, how can I say this? Not stereotypes, but certain themes or approaches to design in aquaria spaces that maybe have become overemphasized. It happens with theming, right? With theming, maybe there's too much focus on Main Street in Americana theme design. In aquaria, I would argue we sometimes get a little too much into that stuff, which is the certain type of tank that has a certain look and it gets replicated all over. Now, I think it gets a little more interesting for me as we go into the tanks here with all the rays and stuff, and people can pet them, and kids love this, of course. So that's always a part of an attraction like this, is the hands-on, literally hands-on approach where people can interact with the sea life, and it's fun, and it's something that is it's tactile, and that's one thing you can't do in a lot of, say, themed or immersive spaces, is have an actual tactile connection. Swimming with dolphins in a lot of Caribbean nations, and people go on cruises, that's common as well. And so you can think of this as part of that tendency to bring a tactile sensory experience into the aquarium itself. And I think it's something that is unique and important. Now here are the classic jellies, and when I show you the Monterey Bay Aquarium coming up, it's again a thing where you say, oh, there's jellyfish, and it almost becomes its own trend, right, where you expect to see colorful jellyfish, and you see this at so many aquaria around the world. Not saying it's a bad thing, but I want to highlight this because I think there are tendencies that get repeated from one aquarium to the next, and the question becomes, should the design go beyond this? Because we are underwhelmed a little bit. I'm not saying this specifically about the Mandalay version, but I want to offer that. Now here's an aquarium, S.E.A. Aquarium. My photo is from Singapore. This, I think, is a real top-notch aquarium. Some of this, the design of the tank here, it's absolutely massive, right? Absolutely massive. I think over 100 feet long, 30, 40, 50 feet high. So some of this is quite stunning. Now they also have a maritime museum there as well, which I think, along with the aquarium, highlights more of that narrative component I'm talking about. I feel that the Shark Reef at Mandalay, they have the obligatory plaques that tell you this is a crocodile, this is a Komodo, but there's not a lot of storytelling there other than the theme design, which is in some ways almost distinct from or apart from the sea life. And what I liked here at S.E.A. Aquarium and the Maritime Museum in Singapore was that they really did think about combining those three elements, the narrative, the design, and the sea life. Okay, so let me refer back to my main title of this video, the dangers of sea life. And I should say specifically, there's a narrative danger of sea life. So what I'm referring to is the fact, I referenced this earlier, that if you rely only on the marvel, say, of your jellies, of your sharks, or your Komodo dragon, whatever, either an aquarium or a zoo, a hybrid zoo theme park like Animal Kingdom, you risk a danger. And I think the danger is you can't assume that the sea life tells its own stories. Now, in a sense, they do, but in another sense, they don't. And in one sense, you have to fill in some of the gaps. Not every guest is going to know about the sea life. They're not going to understand even what some of the creatures are. They're not going to understand their ecosystems. They're not going to understand some of the conservation efforts, etc. So, I think it's really important as we look at more images of S.E.A. Aquarium in Singapore to balance these three components of the narrative, the sea life, and the design. And again, I believe that S.E.A. Aquarium in Singapore does this. They have the obligatory walk-through, larger version than the Mandalay cage for you to view the sea creatures. Now here's the Monterey Bay Aquarium. One of the things they stress, recalling on my visit to the space many years ago, is conservation and the importance of sustainable fishing and other practices. So that's kind of a important issue. This particular space is the Aquadome. This is at, actually of all places, the Radisson in Berlin. And so this is a very interesting space that has an aquarium in the middle of a hotel lobby. And so certainly you see aquaria type exhibits in spaces that aren't traditional aquaria. Now here's a famous one. This is the Georgia Aquarium. I I think Georgia Aquarium has done some remarkable things. I haven't visited it, but I heard a theming presentation of some of their designers years ago, and it was pretty fascinating what they wanted to do in terms of the storytelling component in particular. So again, you're seeing some of these because I think they highlight different approaches in terms of those three components. And then lastly, Dubai Mall Aquarium, which if you know anything about Dubai, they have some of the best themed and immersive spaces in the world. And you can see, again, this has become really that dome where you walk under the sea life. It's become so classic, I think, in aquarium design. If I were designing an aquarium today, I would worry about that, right? As I've talked about, I would think, oh, wait, people have already seen this. Now, here's back at Mandalay Bay Shark Reef Aquarium. This was pretty cool. This is a wreck. It's an underwater, it's a galleon, a ship you go through. You can see the touch screen comes up again. And this I thought was pretty cool. This was maybe my highlight for the design. You do go through different spaces. As you walk through, you see there's the jungle where we came from. There's the kind of walking through that. There's the Caribbean, the reef tunnel, and then the jellyfish, and then here we are in the shipwreck. So it's kind of nice once you know the map of the space, what you're looking at, what you're getting into, and that was kind of cool. So they did think certainly about divvying the space up, and a lot of aquaria do this. S.E.A. Aquarium in Singapore does it more by the ecosystem, by the zone in which the sea life would live or exist. And so there are different ways, obviously, to tell this story. This, from a design standpoint, I thought was pretty cool. You could see with the shipwreck, different sides of it. You could look below. You, of course, have the panoramic view in front of you. There's a video screen, and then you could look above. I don't know if they need the video screen there, but it's something, in some cases, you use technology to highlight or to emphasize certain components of what you're trying to address in terms of the sea life and so forth. So we're just looking around here at the wreck of the ship, and they did a nice job with the theming here, with the design. And I think this is one way to tell the story, as I talked about earlier. Think of what's going to make sense organically, right? How can you combine the story, the design, the sea life themselves? And in the case of Mandalay Bay, I would say the story is the least, right? I think the sea life is probably 40% of what they're doing here. Maybe another, I don't know, I'm trying to do my math here on the fly. Another 35% is the design, because I do think they emphasize the Mandalay design, and the remaining part would be the story, which is limited to, here's a map, you walk through the various spaces, there's kind of a cool shark up there, and then here are the plaques that describe what you're seeing. But it doesn't tell you a lot. There's a little bit more on the map, the interactive map that you can press and learn, some issues about conservation and so forth. But it's not the highlight, certainly, of the Mandalay Bay Shark Reef Aquarium. I do wonder about the space. It's a cool space. I wonder, as the years go by, how they might think about altering it a little bit. Can they, and it seems to me that's why they had the Arctic exhibit, which I did a video on as well, which had some issues, certainly. Now, there's a conservation plaque, so that's always kind of the obligatory thing you see in a space like this. So it's an interesting space for sure, and I hope you enjoyed what we looked at today here at Shark Reef Aquarium at Mandalay Bay. I hope you enjoyed the video feature today here at the Shark Reef at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. Please come back for additional video features of the Immersive Worlds Handbook.